It all started with the nightmares. Dex figured they'd been in the kindergarten for about 2 weeks, and things had been going well. Red band class got easier as Dex ate regularly and worked out daily. His body was becoming toned, strong, and he was catching up with Dick at an alarming rate. Despite being older than Dex, it seemed to gall Dick that Dex was bigger than him. Dex couldn't help it. He'd always been kind of tall, and the muscle made it even more obvious. He'd heard Dick floating the idea that Dex and Ryan might be more than just friends, but he seemed pretty careful to say it out of earshot of Dex or Cutter. Dex had known enough people who were scared of folks to know that, despite being 2 years older than him, Dick was a little hesitant about finding out if Dex could fight or not. Masha, too, seemed to be thriving, and that made Dex feel a lot better about this place. Britt, Jenny, and Daniel now ate breakfast with them, all of them excitedly talking about what they were doing in class that day. Dex laughed at their lessons a few times, liking how it sounded more like play than work. Masha told him that sometimes they did an exercise similar to the telephone, where they would pass a message along and change it a little. Sometimes it got kind of funny, and Masha was barely able to tell them about it without giggling. Dex smiled at her stories, but it was hard not to notice the angry shadow eating not too far away. It appeared that Chandra, the platinum-haired bully of a few weeks ago, had not been having a fun time. For someone who had been such a catty asshole, she had really lost the most in this exchange. Her friends were now eating meals with her enemy, and the teachers had her playing second fiddle to a girl half her age. It was hard not to recognize that she was plotting something. The first time Masha woke up screaming, Dex thought it was just bad dreams. She was sleeping in her own bed now, no longer afraid of being alone, and Dex had been glad that she was settling in. She still spent her evenings with her two best friends, Dunstan and Dex, but she always went back to her bed when it was time to sleep. So when he heard her scream, he was up like a shot, weaving between the beds to get to her. He was afraid that Chandra had made her move, that Masha was being taken away by one of the minders for something strange and a little scary. But when he found her thrashing in her bed, he was almost relieved. She was clutching the covers, tossing and groaning, and he patted her head and tried to soothe her as those sleeping around her sighed and rolled over. Nightmares were something he could understand. Dex didn't wake up screaming, but it was only because he was used to being quiet. Every night he watched Wizard die, and every night he just stood there as it happened. He watched the red spread across his friend, watched it soak into his clothes, watched the life leave his eyes, and then Dex would wake up, only to fall into the same dream again. Some days he worked himself until he was exhausted, and those nights he didn't have any dreams. Those were the good nights, but they didn't happen often enough. He lay there with her that night, giving her what comfort he could, but it wasn't enough. She shuddered awake several times, but that was the only time she screamed on the first night. Dex was tired the next morning, but not as tired as he would come to be the next day. When he asked her about the nightmares, Masha said she couldn't remember them at all. She remembered being tired, she remembered being scared, but she didn't remember why. Just dreams, I guess. I've never really been prone to nightmares, but maybe it's all the brain stuff we've been doing lately. She started chatting with her friends when they came to join them, but Dex wasn't sure he agreed. He tried to talk about it with Dunstan, but he was no help. He looked like he had slept worse than Masha, and when Dex mentioned it, he made a lame attempt at a quip. Maybe she's been poking around in my head. There are definitely some things in there that could cause a few nightmares. When the bell rang a few minutes later, they all shuffled off to class, each looking less sure than the other that they wanted to go. Grab something that seems to speak to you, something that interests you. I want to see if we can get some solid data on your abilities today. Dr. Hammershoal had lined up some objects, and as Dunstan looked at them, he couldn't find a single one that he actually wanted to touch. There was a single Nike trainer on one end, a dirty brown rabbit toy that looked like it had been excavated from a ditch, a transformer that was currently in the shape of a pickup truck, and a frisbee that looked like someone had run over half of it. It wasn't just how they looked either. Dunstan could almost feel something coming off them, a kind of energy he didn't like, and it made him want to touch them even less. "Doc, I don't really want to touch any of these." "Come now, my boy, just a quick touch so we can see what we're working with. You want to know the extent of your powers, don't you?" He did, but these tests had been getting weirder as the days passed. It had been bad enough when he was watching people's lives as their parents fought or people were mugged, but for the last 2 days it had been different somehow. Tuesday, he'd held a wallet that had belonged to a man that had been kidnapped. Dunstan had watched them take the wallet and then saw the man as he went into the trunk of their car. The little doctor had asked him questions after that, and Dunstan had been able to remember the license plate of the car and what color it had been. He told them, and then the next day, there had been a hat on the table. It wasn't a particularly special hat, it was just a battered old White Sox hat, but when Dunstan had touched it, he'd seen a kid about his age walking by the side of the road. The kid had been hitchhiking, Dunstan was almost certain, and when a station wagon with Detroit plates had picked him up, the hat had fallen into the floorboard when he passed out against the window. The kid had put it in his lap, his hands kneading it like a worry stone, and when the kid had been carried from the car into somewhere, the hat had been left behind. Dunstan thought it might have been a hotel or a resort or something, but he couldn't be sure. Now, there were more things, and Dunstan didn't want to touch them. The last two had been different somehow. Dunstan had seen bad stuff before when he touched things, but this was different. He got the idea that Hammershoal knew he would see those things, but now the game had higher stakes. Hammershoal looked interested when he told him about the kid in the station wagon and the old guy in the trunk of the car. He'd scribbled down information and told Dunstan he'd done very well, but Dunstan didn't think he'd been trying to test him. Dunstan suspected that he was using him to gain information. But for what? "I don't know," he said. "Sometimes I see awful things when I touch the stuff you bring in. I don't know if I..." When the rabbit came sailing towards him, Dunstan stuck his hands out to catch it without much thought. He didn't want it to fall on the ground, no more than he wanted anything here to fall off the table, but he realized the trap the second he'd caught it. The second his fingers sank into the plush fur of the filthy toy, he knew he had made a grave error. Dunstan got a flash, and then more than he bargained for. He was walking up the street with a bag of garbage in one hand and the stuffed bunny in the other. No, that wasn't quite right, and Dunstan realized about a second before the kid got snatched that he was seeing things from the swinging perspective of the bunny and not the kid holding it. The garbage fell to the sidewalk, and the kid had a death grip on the rabbit as someone grabbed him up and threw him in the back of a panel van. It was the kind his friends at the group home had always called a candy wagon, with blacked-out windows and heavy sliding doors, and this one seemed to live up to the expectation. No candy, but there was a treat in the back for somebody. The kid cried a lot and clutched at the rabbit as the van rolled off. Dunstan could feel the tears soaking into his fur and wanted to do something. Is this what it was like being a toy? Standing by impotently as some kid who loved you got hurt or killed? If this is what it was like, Dunstan thought the characters in the Toy Story movie would need some pretty big therapy by the end of the series. They drove and drove, the kids' tears coming endlessly, but once they stopped, things got a whole lot worse. The guy opened the doors of the van, letting in light as the kid huddled against the back wall. The light was snuffed out pretty quick, and the guy grabbed the rabbit and tossed Dunstan into the corner as he went to work. Dunstan had a front row seat, the black button eyes seeing every cut, and every scream. When the little hand reached out to grab him, Dunstan felt the kid pull the rabbit close as he wheezed out his final breath. Even in his last moments, he wanted the comfort that rabbit could give him, and when the man took him from the back of the van, he had a death grip on the grubby little toy. They went through the woods, the leaves crunching and the birds singing their hesitant song. Dunstan had seen a sign, Ridgeway Overlook, and when they reached the kid's final resting place, the killer had dropped him like he was nothing but a sack of garbage. The boy was dead, the rabbit slipping from his hand, and Dunstan watched as he dug the hole. He begged, he pleaded to be released from this, but it wasn't until the boy was under the earth that the hand gripped him and took him back to the van. He dropped him not far from the sign, as casually as he had the boy, and that was when Dunstan came out of it. Dunstan dropped the rabbit, letting it fall to the ground, and looked around in confusion. He realized that all that had happened in a matter of seconds, the memories having been imparted just as quickly as he'd reached for the rabbit. He looked at Dr. Hammarskjöld like the man had raped him, and to his credit, Dr. Hammarskjöld had the good grace to look sorry. What the hell was that? Dunstan was shocked to hear how unsteady his voice was. Did you see something? The little man asked. If you saw something, I need to know about it. How could you do that? Dunstan asked, wanting to curl into a ball and resisting the urge with great difficulty. How the hell could you do that? You had no right. You had no... What we do here, Dunstan, is bigger than you and I. We are providing a public service, as well as feeling out your blossoming abilities. Now, tell me what you saw. Dunstan told him, trying to keep his voice from shaking. But when Hammarskjöld told him that he had done well, and he could leave early, Dunstan made his way quickly to the bathroom and threw up. He couldn't believe what he had seen, and it was something that would stick with him for a long, long time. Dex was getting worried about his friends. Masha had been sleeping poorly for the last couple of days. Dunstan had been quiet ever since lessons on Tuesday. Dex had recognized Masha's problem right away, but had been slower to pick up on Dunstan's. Dex was starting to realize just how much of his attention he was giving to the program, and it made him feel kind of crappy. They were sitting in the game room one afternoon, Masha taking a nap on one of the couches as the boys watched cartoons on the big TV. Dex really liked this Adventure Time show, and he was a little jealous of the carefree Finn and his adventures in the land of Uwu. Dunstan was watching too, but he would periodically wipe at his eyes as he watched, crying sometimes, for no discernible reason. "You okay, man?" Dex finally asked him. "Yeah," Dunstan said, his voice watery as runners of snot slid from his nostrils. I don't know what it is, but it's all right. It'll pass. It always does." Dex watched him close his eyes, tears dripping through them, and gain control of himself before sighing deeply and fixing his usual smile back on. "Is it the training?" Dex asked. "Are they making you do stuff that hurts you?" Dunstan opened his mouth to respond, but didn't seem to have an answer right away. I don't really know how to explain it. I told you, I can see things, right? When I touch stuff, I mean." Dex nodded, Masha rolling a little bit as she tried to get comfortable. "Well, they've been giving me some stuff lately. Stuff I don't really want to hold once I have it." "What kind of stuff?" Dex asked. Not sure he wanted to know either, but trying to help Dunstan as best he could. "Kids stuff, toys and stuffed animals and things. At first it was just trucks and action figures and things I could make sense of, but lately it's changed. Today they handed me a stuffed rabbit, and I saw a kid get dragged into a panel van, and they killed him. Like..." Dunstan started crying again, and Dex wished he hadn't asked. "Dude, they really worked this kid over. Then they took him into the woods, and he died as this sick prick dug a hole and put him in it. I watched this kid watching this guy dig his grave. I don't know how to process that, Dex. I don't know what to do with this stuff. Stuff like this scares me. And when I get done, Hammershoal wants me to fill out a damn survey. A survey! He yelled, and some of the kids got quiet as they looked at him. Masha woke up, looking scared, as she looked over at Dunstan. Dunstan, what's wrong? Are you okay? Dunstan had gotten off the couch, looking like he wasn't sure whether to run or sit back down. I don't know, he finally told the little girl, and Dex thought for sure that he was going to take a seat again when something over his shoulder caught his attention. His lower jaw was quivering as he watched, and Dex turned to see what had caught him, and saw the news station talking about the remains of a child they had discovered. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but the news prompt said, 10-year-old case closed. Remains of Donovan Kyles found in New Hampshire woods at 3 o'clock this afternoon. The kid pictured couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, but it was the toy he was holding in the featured picture that caught Dex's attention. The stuffed rabbit was pretty jarring after what Dunstan had said, and when he looked back, the boy was bolting from the room. Dunstan came into Dr. Hammershoal's office like a bull in a china shop. The little doctor was seated at his computer, making notes on the day's experiments, and he jumped about a foot when the kid came barreling in. Dunstan looked mad enough to chew nails and spit staples, but Dr. Hammershoal resisted the urge to just push the button for the security people. He had expected something like this might happen, and it was best to get it out of the way. What the hell? How did they know? How did they know? Dunstan asked. I'm guessing you're talking about Donovan Kyle, Dr. Hammershoal said. Yeah, I filled out a survey after you practically shoved that filthy rabbit in my hand, and about a day later they just happened to find the kid? That seems pretty damn convenient to me. Dr. Hammershoal locked his computer and turned to give the boy his full attention. It's not convenient at all, Dunstan. Many of the children in this program are used for such matters. Many of your friends in the group are given situations that they may or may not be able to tell the outcome of. Mark is being used to find suspects for various police forces through photographs, fingerprints, and footcasts. Anja is using photos to tell us who might be a potential security threat, though she isn't quite as helpful as you or Mark at the moment. So you see, this isn't just you. We all have our part to play in the grand scheme of things. Yeah, well, my grand scheme requires me to watch kids get butchered, and I don't much care for it, Dunstan said. Dr. Hammershoal nodded. I can see where that might be problematic. Would you like me to help you? Dunstan gave him an odd look and took a step back. Help me? How would you do that, exactly? Dr. Hammershoal pushed out his chair and offered it to Dunstan. I have a small talent with mental suggestion. I've helped many people your age forget things, lessen the blow of things, become less anxious about things. And I can help you, if you like. Dunstan hesitated, seeming divided over the idea of the little man helping him forget, but ultimately he took a seat. In the end, Dr. Hammershoal reflected, they all decided to forget. Now then, count down from 10 for me. Once you reach 10, we may begin. Dunstan was much happier at dinner than he had been in days. He had most of the table in stitches with his quips, but Dex thought his smile looked a little phony. From across the cafeteria, Gerald thought the same, and there was something new as well, a new string linking them now, a purple one. This was the first time he had seen a purple string, and Gerald didn't like it in the least bit. Dunstan would need watching now, and Gerald hoped that he would be up to the task when the time came. Dex was up, looking for the source of the scream before he was fully awake. He knew who was screaming, and Dunstan was on his way from the other side of the room too, as the other kids started waking up. Masha was thrashing around, her covers snaked around her legs and arms, screaming as she fought against the imaginary enemies. The other kids were standing around, not sure what to do, but this was Dex's nightly routine at this point. He pulled the blankets around her, making her into a human burrito, and shushed her as he rocked. Dex was aware of how ridiculous he looked, but he didn't care. Masha wasn't getting enough sleep, and it was starting to show. "I swear it's every night now," Dunstan said, sitting down next to him as he soothed her. "She's gonna miss class at this rate if—" "Hey, you guys think you can keep your friend from screaming?" came a familiar snide voice. "She's keeping all the normal people awake." They glowered over at Chandra, her bed still next to the little girl's, and she put her hands up and rolled over. Despite being kept up, Dex didn't think she looked all that tired. Chandra appeared to be getting enough sleep, despite the nightly screaming sessions, and that was surprising. Must be nice, he thought, to be able to function off a few hours. "Catch some Z's done," Dex said. "I'll lay with her tonight." "You sure? You did it last night, too. I don't mind taking a shift." "I'm sure. They just need my body for training. Your mind and her mind need to be sharp for lessons. Get some sleep. I got this." Dunstan nodded, heading back to bed as Dex tried to get comfortable in the little girl's tiny bed. The bed was hardly large enough for one normal-sized person, and Dex found it difficult to get comfortable with so little space. He was tired, but the frame pushed at him in painful ways as he tried to settle. Masha was snoring already, the nightmares gone, but Dex doubted this would be the last one tonight. "Gonna come keep me company next, big fella?" Chandra teased. "I'm sure I could make some room for you." Dex gave her the finger and she rolled over, cackling like a hen as his eyes got heavy. The nightmares had started about a week ago, and they weren't getting any better. After 2 nights, Dex had suggested that she talk with the minders about it, but they were no help. They had suggested more activity before bed, changing her diet, even that it was a result of her powers beginning to grow. But their solutions offered nothing but more of the same. Dex didn't know what to do, but it was starting to affect everyone. He had seen some dark looks thrown Masha's way, and even their little circle of friends had cast unfriendly eyes on her. She let out a muffled moan as she shifted in her swaddling blanket, and Dex held her tight until she stilled. He had to get some sleep. Class started in 3 hours, and it would be another day of exercise. He was snoring before he knew it, and thankfully, Masha managed to sleep through the night. She almost cried as her hand struck the glass of juice and sent it spilling across the table. Dunstan couldn't even be mad about it, and they got it cleaned up pretty quickly. "I'm sorry. I'm so clumsy." "No, you're exhausted," Dex said. "You need to talk to the minders and get some sleep. You can't keep going like this." "You guys do," Masha said, stifling a yawn as she missed her mouth with a forkful of eggs. "You and Dunstan get up every time I have a nightmare, so the least I can do is push through this." Dex sipped the coffee he'd gotten, wondering if there was a way he could take it with him. He was better at hiding it, but he was just as tired as Masha. Dex was sort of used to being tired, though. So much of living on the street had been sleeping somewhere till they put you out, at least until they found the clubhouse. There had been periods where he would snatch an hour here, a couple of hours there, and then get back on the move again so the cops didn't catch them. "Do you remember what the dreams are about, at least?" Dunstan asked, not for the first time. "What's it matter?" Dex asked, trying to keep the exasperation out of his voice. "If we knew what caused it, maybe we can fix it." "Doesn't matter anyway. I don't I don't remember them. It's like they come on so quickly that I just can't remember what they're about. I'm sorry, guys. I know this has got to be annoying." "It's cool," Dex said. "We'll get through this." The bell rang as they walked off, Britt and Jenny saying they would keep an eye on her. But Dex stopped Dunstan. "Need a favor," he said, Ryan waiting by the door for him as Dunstan looked at the bigger boy questioningly. "If you need me to sit with her tonight, That ain't it. I want you to talk to Dr. Hammershoal about her dreams." Dunstan's face scrunched a little more. "The little doctor? You think he can help?" "Man, I hope so. I'm getting pretty ragged, and I can see she is too. She needs some relief, some sleep, something, or she's going to start breaking down. We need answers. If he has them, then we need his help." Dunstan thought about it, nodding as he thought about the skills the doctor had said he'd had in his time here. "I'll ask," Dunstan said, and the two bumped fists as they headed off towards their daily trials. Rebecca winced as the scent of evergreen filled her nose. This was how they had decided to test her abilities, since she couldn't just manifest visions on demand. Well, this was one of them. It had started with different colors, then color patterns, sounds, a brain scan, certain words and phrases, more sounds, another brain scan, and now smells. They had a bunch of those plastic film canisters, and she was instructed to take the lid off and inhale deeply to see if it elicited a reaction. So far, nothing, but Rebecca was hopeful. If this didn't work, then the minders had mentioned chemical trials, and Rebecca was a little afraid that they would turn her into a zombie or a speed freak or something. She wondered if Dr. Hammershoal had anything to do with this, and that filled her with an old anger. The little doctor had been very careful not to get too close to her, and never to be alone with her. He could clearly see how angry she was at him, blamed him for her being here, and with good reason. It was his fault, she felt certain of it, and if she ever got the chance, she'd take that anger out on the tiny man. She coughed as the smell of cigarettes assaulted her, shaking her head as she tried to catch her breath. She'd had visions in the 3 weeks since she'd arrived, but they had been different from the ones back at school. Those dreams, or visions, or whatever, had been about her. These visions had been about the kindergarten. In them, she was like a ghost or something, floating around and observing people as they went about their day-to-day lives. She saw herself a few times as she walked with Gerald, and watching them move filled her with a deep and unquenchable hunger. It was strange to watch them walking, talking, thinking, living, and also feel the drool as it ran down your chin. "Anything?" asked the minder, making notes on her clipboard as Rebecca smelled. "Just a headache. Cigarettes always make me feel a little nauseous." She said, scribbling something. "Gerald, are you having any luck?" Gerald shrugged, not really sure what to tell her. "Not really. Strings are still there, and the blue one just stretches off through the wall." She nodded, flipping a page and making another note. Rebecca picked up another one and smelled. Yuck. Trash can water. She gagged a little as she put it down, not really sure what they were looking for here. "You know," Rebecca said, "sometimes there is a smell before it happens." "Yeah?" the minder said, looking intently. "It's like the smell before a lightning strike, I guess. It's hard to... Ozone? I guess," she said, not really knowing the word. "Maybe that's something we can work with," the minder said, more to herself than Rebecca. Rebecca thought back to the dreams or visions she'd had last night, and wondered what the lady would make of those. It had been another one of those floaty dreams, but her course took her through the empty halls, as opposed to the full ones. She floated through the dark game room, the cafeteria, the library, and finally to the dormitories. She had heard the little girl screaming from the hallway, and when she came swooping in, she saw the little bundle of bedclothes writhing on her mattress. There was a red crown around her head, a dancing neon halo of terribleness, and she woke up suddenly to hear the little girl being comforted by her friends. Maybe it meant something, maybe it didn't, but Rebecca supposed there had to be something to it, or why would it show it? "Ma'am," Gerald said, and the minder looked up hopefully. "May I go to the bathroom?" Her face fell. "Yeah, Gerald, go ahead." He gave Rebecca a strange look as he left, but she put it out of her mind. Whatever he was actually up to, she supposed he would tell her later. She went back to her smells, hoping for one that would give her some control over this strange and often frightening ability. "Okay, Dunstan, what do you see?" "There's a field. He's playing baseball. No, not baseball. It's just catch. He and another kid are playing catch. The kid is his friend. No, it's more than that. They're dating? Boyfriends? I don't know, but he likes the other boy a lot." Dunstan hadn't really wanted to touch the glove, but as the vision started, he had slipped it on and was popping his fist into the pocket of the glove as he saw more. "They're kissing now. Gross. But they like it. They like each other, and to them, it's good. They have to be careful. If someone sees them, then they could be in trouble. But now someone has seen them, and he's shouting at them." "Who is it?" Hammarskjöld asked. "Who sees them?" He's a priest. No, a minister. He's a minister for the boys' church. The boys, Presbyterian. That's not right, but I don't know the word." "Presbyterian?" the little doctor supplied, and Dunstan nodded. Yeah, I think that's it. The minister, he's real angry. He says the boys are sinning, and he says they're going to burn in hell if they don't repent. The other boy, Micah, his name is Micah. He gets angry. He's bigger than the boy with the glove, 14 and muscled, and he walks over and pushes the minister. He threatens to hurt the minister. Father Gabriel is the minister's name. He pushes him down, telling him to leave them alone. Then Dunstan's eyes went far away, but Hammarskjöld jumped a little when he flinched. What happened? The minister, Father Gabriel, he shot Micah. Micah fell down, and he didn't get back up. The minister panicked. He hadn't meant to kill him, but now... Dunstan shuddered again, crying out as he popped his fist into the glove faster. He shot the boy with the glove, too. Then what happened? Hammarskjöld asked. He needed to know so he could get some justice for those boys. He buried them in the field. He buried them deep. The glove slipped off the kid's hand when he died, and the man who found it, he couldn't find them because they were buried so deep. They never suspected the minister. He showed up to help look, but he knew where they were all along. He knew why. Why didn't he tell? Why didn't he just tell? Dunstan was crying. His sightless eyes were weeping freely, and Hammarskjöld took the glove off him and threw it back onto the desk. Dunstan shook again and looked around, finally finding the little man as he wiped his eyes. I don't like this game. I never see anything nice. It's always terrible stuff. I know, Dr. Hammarskjöld said, but now I can get justice for those boys and make sure that man never hurts anyone else again. Won't do any good. There will always be another one. Another dead kid, another hurt person, another man just looking for someone to put in the ground. Dr. Hammarskjöld started to pat his hand, but thought better of it. God only knew what Dunstan could get if he touched him. Think of it as a service to the dead, then. That boy's family can have some closure, and he can be put to rest. Dunstan nodded. I think I need to visit the bathroom. Did you have anything else for me today? Hammarskjöld checked his watch. It was nearly lunchtime, and He shook his head at how time flew. It seemed he had just finished breakfast, but it was nearly noon, and they had solved 3 missing persons cases and 2 murders. Quite a day already. No, you can take the rest of the day off if you need to. Check with the minder and make sure there's nothing else. Dunstan nodded and left through the side door. Hammershoal had another of his experiments with the string boy, Gerald, later, and he was curious to see what could be made of it. They had tried some mazes, but the results had been mixed. He could avoid dangers well enough, but he couldn't follow the strings to any particular target. They really just seemed to lead him to his destination, but they were constant in that direction. Hammershoal saw no real utility in them, other than leading Gerald to whatever his final destination was. Hammershoal sighed. He hoped it wasn't leading him towards being just another item on this table for Dunstan to read like a book of secrets. Gerald heard the door open and tried to pluck up his courage. The purple string was still firmly jutting from the door, and he could see it following the boy in the sneakers as he approached the urinal. It was Dunstan, it had to be, but he didn't know how to begin to tell him what he knew. Gerald didn't even know if he should tell him, but he knew it was information he needed. Gerald had heard something interesting, and he knew it would solve the problems Dunstan and his friends were having. He and Rebecca had been in the library yesterday when it happened. Rebecca was working her way through Eclipse, the vampire books that had her attention lately, and Gerald was looking for something to hold his own interest. The strings weren't much use when it came to picking books, and he was stalking the shelves when he overheard a conversation that the speakers were trying to keep away from the others. "Why don't you just say you're sorry and come be part of the group too?" someone was whispering. Whoever they were whispering to had scoffed. "Apologize? Apologize for what? She comes in here and thinks she's such hot shit. I haven't done anything to say sorry for." "It would bring peace, Chandra. You could come be part of our group instead of being alone all the time. We don't hate you, but you have to let go of this crap with Masha." "I don't think so. But when she kicks you both to the curb, I guess you can come be my friends again." "Whatever, Chandra. We tried to be nice, but if you're going to be like this, then we don't want to be any part of it." They had walked away, not even noticing him there, and when Chandra had whispered to herself, it was almost too low to catch. "See if you want to be friends with her when she's a drooling vegetable. A couple more nights without sleep, and she'll be nutso." Gerald had checked, and sure enough, the red string running towards her had let him know that the girl with the platinum hair was dangerous. He had thought about it long and hard, and now Gerald thought for sure that Chandra was the one sending the dreams. He didn't understand why, but he rarely understood why people did what they did. She was a bully, he supposed, and she really didn't need a good reason. Chandra didn't like Masha, felt she had stolen her friends, and she meant to have them back, even if it cost a little girl her sanity. He heard the water running in the sink and realized it was now or never. He opened the door and found himself eye to eye with the boy, Dunstan having turned to leave as Gerald came out. Dunstan jumped a little, clearly not expecting anyone else to be in here, and laughed as he looked at Gerald's somber face. "Jeez, you scared me. I didn't know anyone else was in here. It's all yours if you need the sink. I was just..." "No, sorry," Gerald started, not really sure how to begin. "I was actually hoping to talk with you." Dunstan kept his smile in place, but it looked a touch unsure of itself. "Well, you picked a heck of a place for it. Must be pretty important to ambush a guy in the can." Gerald closed his eyes, collecting his thoughts before he blew this. This was important, maybe the most important thing he would do with his life, and he couldn't let it slip by. The purple string had him unsure of himself in a way that he rarely was, but he had to power through it. "I know something about your friend, the little girl, and why she's having nightmares." "Oh?" Dunstan said, his smile turning into something less than friendly. "Well, if you've got some idea, I'd love to hear it. I know she's keeping you guys awake too, but If it's another question about why we can't just gag her, then just... No, Gerald said. I think I know what's causing it, and I want to hear what you think about it. Dunstan nodded, opening the bathroom door and holding it open for him. Just so happens I have the afternoon off, and given that you were skulking in a bathroom, I can assume that you don't have anything particularly pressing either. Let's take a walk. You can tell me all about it. He and Gerald went to the media room, Gerald telling him what he suspected, and Dunstan putting the pieces together. By the time the bell rang for lunch, Dunstan had a pretty good idea of what they had to do, foremost among them being taking Gerald to the lunch table so he could talk it over with his friends. Lunch that day looked more like a war council. Rebecca was used to a big group around the kids that Gerald usually watched, but it took her a minute to realize that he was with them today. This explained where he'd been for the rest of the morning, she supposed, and he glanced up as she started to walk by with her pizza. She had intended to go sit in their usual place, not wanting to spoil his chances of getting into the little gang they had there, but Gerald called her name and waved her over before she could escape. "This is Rebecca," he said, as she squeezed into the offered chair. "She's a friend of mine." "The more the merrier," one of the kids said, and she thought his name might be Dunstan. He was in their class, but he usually went off with her least favorite doctor for private lessons, so she didn't often get to work with him. "This is Dex, Masha, Jenny, Brittany, Heather, Daniel, and Ryan, and I'm Dunstan," he said, bringing her up to speed on those assembled. "Gerald, our newest friend here, besides you, was just telling us something very interesting," he said, clapping Gerald on the back as he grinned at him. Gerald accepted it, though his returning grin was a little wooden. "I told them that Chandra was responsible for the nightmares that Masha had been waking up with lately." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? How did you come by that information?" "I happened upon a conversation I probably wasn't supposed to hear while we were in the library," he said, glancing at Brittany and Jenny, "though I didn't know between who until now." Both girls looked a little ashamed, Jenny shaking her head. "We didn't know that was what she was talking about. We just assumed that she would get over it and come be friends with everyone." "Chandra isn't the making friends type, it would appear," Dex said, fingers steepled before his face. "The question is, what do we do about it?" "We could tell Mrs. Cashmere," Jenny started, but Masha shook her head immediately. "I get the feeling this sort of thing isn't punished. If I'm too weak to sense that she's the one giving me nightmares, then I deserve what I get. No, I think we have to handle this on our own." "How do we even know that it's actually Chandra anyway?" Heather asked, looking at Gerald distrustfully. "Maybe this guy is just playing games or something. We don't have any proof. Only he heard what she said after Britt and Jenny left." "That's true," Daniel said. "We just have your word, Gerald. I don't want to condemn someone on just the word of..." "The red stuff," Heather said suddenly, thinking she understood what the visions had been trying to show her. She suddenly had the attention of the whole table, and it made her wish that she'd just kept her mouth shut. "I get visions. It's my power. Dunstan, you remember, I told you guys on the first day of class that I had visions about things that may happen." Dunstan was nodding, and she was glad. She didn't dare ask Gerald if he remembered, because that would ruin her credibility. They were suspicious of him, so if she wanted to convince them of what she believed, she would have to go in alone. "Well, I've been having these weird dreams where I wander the kindergarten by night, and last night I heard Masha as she began to scream. I floated back in, and she had a crown made of red neon around her head. I guess maybe that was the nightmare, but it didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before." A few of them were nodding, but Daniel was clearly unmoved. You'll excuse me if I don't just take your word for it. I want Masha to get some sleep too. I want all of us to get some sleep, but we can't just go around lobbing accusations, no matter how unpleasant the target is." Seems there's really only one thing to do, Masha said, looking unhappy about it, but resolved. I'll have to meet her there. Meet her where? Dex said, not sure what she was talking about. In my dreams. Now that I know she's attacking me, I can plan for it and set up defenses. If it's just dreams, then the defenses won't work, but if it's her, then she might have a nasty surprise tonight. The bell rang for afternoon classes, and they headed out, Dunstan moving easily into the trio of Rebecca and Gerald. It appeared that they had been accepted into the group, and as Dunstan and Gerald began to talk about something as normal as video games, Rebecca had to hold in the urge to say that she had told him so. He could have been part of this much earlier, but she supposed his strings had known something that he hadn't. They were running the obstacle course again, and it still took a lot of focus to pull it off, especially as tired as he was. The kindergarten's version of an obstacle course was 3 parts Ninja Warrior, 3 parts 90s game show, and 3 parts military training. The last part was a dash of masochism that seemed to hang around most of the red band training. Maybe that was Cutter's special edition, but whatever it was or wasn't, Dex knew 2 things. 1, that he was tired, and 2, that he was still making the other guys look like crap. Dex was pretty used to pouring it on and outrunning the police. You didn't last long on the streets if you couldn't dodge the law when the chips were down, and Dex had lasted longer than most. He had never used the brain blast on a cop. That was a great way to get a serious APB out on you, but he made it a point to know escape routes in an area he was going to stay in long term. They had never raided the clubhouse, but he was sure it was only a matter of time. The wall was nothing more than another chain-link fence to scale. The pit was just rooftops to jump between. The sandbags were pedestrians and bike messengers. The reflex board, the hurdles, the narrow alleys, they were all just one more part of his daily escape from pursuit. Dex glanced around, smiling as he watched Dick fall off the moving platform for about the 3rd time. For someone who claimed to have been a state champion, he was clearly struggling to get through the course. Dex had started out close to Ryan, trying to help the kid out, but Ryan had told him after a few slips that he wanted to do it himself. So, Dex had left him behind, and as he crossed the endpoint, he looked back to see that Ryan was a little ahead of Dick and his cohorts, but not by much. "It's always wild to watch you run the course, kid," Cutter said, coming up behind him to watch the others. "How do you do it so fast? Most of the kids we grab off the street are malnourished or barely capable of running. You move like we stole you from a junior ROTC event." Dex just shrugged. "The fact that you guys took me off the streets and not from police custody or a halfway house should tell you everything you need to know." It was weird, Dex knew, to talk about getting snatched off the street like that, but after a while it was probably easier than being mad about it. It was so normal around here, in fact, that many of them swapped stories about being taken like anecdotes at a party. Dex didn't hold it against Cutter. Cutter hadn't grabbed him, and even if he had, it was just a job. That was what they always said in mob stories, wasn't it? It wasn't personal. It was just business. "Maybe you could give them some pointers or something," Cutter joked, but Dex only shrugged. "Ryan would follow him, but the rest would go out of their way to prove they didn't work. They don't like me, and the feeling is kind of mutual." "Well, it's to be expected, I guess. Most of these guys won't even make decent minders when they wash out. You, however, have got a real future with the minders, if you don't graduate." Dex wasn't sure how to take that and decided to just nod. "Do most of the kids join up? The ones who don't graduate, I mean." Cutter nodded. "Nearly all of them. Some of them leave, and it's hard to function out there, knowing what you know. They may resent the Blacksite for taking them, but it's harder out there. You know that. Here we have structure, order. Out there it might as well be Lord of the Flies." "Do the ones who graduate join up too?" Dex asked, feeling a buzz of pride as Ryan outpaced the group and made it to the climbing wall. Cutter was quiet for a moment, and when Dex looked up, He saw the older man staring at the kids in a very different way. The guy looked like a Navy SEAL, a huge man who could have taken any of the kids and broken them, maybe any two of them over his knee. He didn't seem to be a man that was often afraid, and the look of mystified terror on his face was the scariest thing that Dex had ever seen. No, the graduates go somewhere else. Their mission is not the same as ours, Dexter. Our mission, sir? I like you, kid. You got a yard of guts, but I don't really think you're graduation material. The eggheads that graduate are rarely wearing red bands. Red bands are the muscle core, kid, and they know it. 90% of their minders and snatchers come from the red bands, and I think you've got a promising future at it. I don't know about that, Dex said, not even taking offense at the implication that he couldn't graduate. I don't think I could ever snatch kids. Cutter shrugged. I see the way you are with the smaller ones, the ones who need a friend. You can also be tough, which is something you need here too. You've seen how I can whip up the kids, but what you haven't seen is me have to get mean yet. I can be a real bastard, Dex. Don't doubt it. There are some people, he spat the words like it was bitter, overseas who could attest to that. These kids need looking out for sometimes, though. And Dex, I think you'd be good at it. Dex opened his mouth, but Cutter shook his head. You don't gotta say nothing. Just think about it, and keep an open mind. He walked away then, yelling at Dick to stop effing around, and Dex almost missed his chance. Sir, he yelled, and Cutter turned back to look at him. Yeah, I know the minders are supposed to keep the peace. You said so on your first day, but what happens to students who attack each other? Cutter grinned, thinking of thinning the competition before they get to your level. Dex didn't answer, let him think what he wanted. Fist fights, attempted murders, even poisoning are grounds for termination. If it's something more subtle, though, something like your friend there can do, he said, indicating Ryan, then I'd say it'd be chalked up to just one of those things. This place runs by the law of the jungle. Only the strong survive. Some kids don't make it to graduation. Some of you kids leave with a little blood on your hands. Don't worry, though. You'll get fresh blood on the job. He walked off then, and Dex wondered exactly what he had gotten himself into. Masha was trying to concentrate on the lesson, but it was hard as she felt the push of angry bees against her skull. How had she never felt this before? It was so obvious now that she was aware of it. It was like losing a tooth and finding the hole. Now that she was aware of the energy pushing towards her, she couldn't not feel it. The energy you push out is best visualized when it's being formed. It takes the form that you choose, but it must be molded into what you need for your... Mrs. Cashmere was droning on and on about something, but Masha was hardly paying attention. All around her was a soft buzzing of placid energy, as the others let their minds wander too. If she reached out with her mind, Masha could feel what they were doing, but she tried to let them have their privacy. Sometimes she did it without meaning to. Touching that energy came to her as easily as listening, and that was how she had found out that Heather and Daniel were interested in each other. They weren't in love, but they liked each other, and they had done the thing that grown-ups did sometimes. They were being what her mother would call mushy right now, sending little mental love notes to each other as they tried not to stare at each other. Britt and Jenny were playing a card game in their head, something of their own invention, and Chandra, sitting way in the back, was attempting to break into her mind for some reason. Masha could already see the terrible things that she was pushing through her mental barrier, and it took a lot of effort not to cry. Why was she doing this? Masha had never done anything to her, and she was just being mean for no reason. Didn't seem to matter why, though. It was happening, and there didn't seem to be much she could do about it. Why not? The voice was strong, direct, a much older version of her own voice, and one that made her look up and take notice. "It's your head. They're your dreams. Why can't you do something? It's your mind. You can do anything you want." "Anything I want," Masha almost said out loud. As Ms. Cashmere droned on, Masha suddenly imagined her mind as a castle, something with big stone walls and a moat. The energy coming in was a strong wind, something that had been trying to blow down a shack, but was suddenly butting up against a high, strong wall. She felt an immediate end to the angry pressure on the back of her head. Glancing in her periphery, she saw Chandra's eyebrows knit together, her forehead dimpling as she pressed out hard. "Blow, wind, blow," Chandra said lightly. "You can't get me." She turned back to the lesson, her defenses in place, and wondered what other surprises could be in place when the girl came poking around that night. She would be ready for her, that was for sure, and who knew what might be waiting. "The middle box," Gerald said, pointing to the blue one. Gerald stuck his hand through the hole, the string coming off of it green, and found a candy bar. The green one, box 1, contained a bunch of broken glass. The orange one, box 3, contained a large black scorpion that flexed its stinger as the lid came off. Gerald nodded, seeing the test for what it was. The other two both contained orange strings, which would have sent him to the infirmary for sure. The tests that Dr. Hammarskjöld was conducting were becoming more and more interesting as time went on. Yesterday, he had asked him to pick a door. The first one had a red string, the second one had an orange string, but the third one had a less orange string than the middle one. The third door had contained a dog, one of the big ones that would bite, but Gerald had closed the door as it began to growl. The other two had contained a gun that was rigged to fire if he had opened it, and a hive of bees that had swarmed around the room. Before that, it had been more mazes, but Hammarskjöld was done playing it safe, it seemed. He wanted to test Gerald's ability, and he was willing to draw blood for it. "What color were the other two strings?" Hammarskjöld asked, making notes. "Orange," Gerald said. "Neither of them would have killed me, probably." Good. Next test." Gerald turned to find 4 boxes, a red one, a blue one, a green one, and a yellow one. They all had holes cut into the top of them. All of them looked benign, but Gerald hesitated before walking too close. They were all set up as if they didn't hold anything more dangerous than a paper cut, but all 4 had glowing red strings attached to them. The red thrummed, pulsing with danger, and Gerald turned back to the little doctor, raising an eyebrow questioningly. "Go on. Pick one." "There is no safe box," Gerald said. "Sorry?" Dr. Hammarskjöld said, looking up from his notes. "There's no safe box. All the boxes have red strings." "Interesting," he said, stroking his chin. "What would you normally do in a situation like this?" "Wait for one of them to change," Gerald said. "And if it didn't?" It's never happened before," Gerald said with a shrug. "Well, make your choice. Make your choice and be damned by it." Gerald started to refuse, but realized it wouldn't matter. He approached the boxes, listening and bumping them as he tried to pick the one that was the least likely to kill him. The red box contained something that rolled around, like a stone or something. The blue box emitted a loud and familiar rattle, and Gerald moved away quickly. The green box made a metallic sound, and Gerald thought he knew what was inside that, too. But the yellow one gave away nothing. It was heavy, like it had weights in it or something, and after pursing his lips, Gerald went to the red one and stuck his hand in. Maybe they had tried to trick him by putting it in the red one, knowing he would assume that that was the bad one. He pulled his hand out, but when he saw the strawberry, he dropped it like it was a poisonous insect. He turned to find Hammershoal holding out an EpiPen, and he breathed a little easier after the shot was administered. "Oh, it was a dirty trick," he said, feeling his throat contract. "I'm extremely allergic to strawberries. Yes, we know. It's in your medical file, hence the pen." Gerald took a few deep breaths, trying to get his heart rate under control, and finally took a seat as his body warred against its desire to close his throat up. "So, what's in the other boxes?" "The first one was a strawberry, as you know. The second had a rattlesnake. The third held a bear trap. And the fourth held a small incendiary device that would have probably caused you to lose your arm and about half your face." Gerald gulped. The little doctor was certainly not playing around. "I would think something like that would have gotten you too," he said sullenly. But Dr. Hammershoal shook his head. "I would have lost some hair, maybe an eyebrow, but I put my chair well outside the blast zone." Gerald took a few minutes to settle himself before getting up and testing his balance. He had allergic reactions before, but they were never very fun. He had to be particularly careful at home because his parents didn't keep needles around for long. If it happened at school, then he was covered. But if he had an allergic reaction at home, he was likely to die before anyone noticed him. "Any more surprises today?" he asked a little more sulkily. "No, I believe that's all. Thank you, Gerald." Gerald picked up his candy bar, but stopped as he turned to the door. "I have a question, sir," he said, seeing the little doctor look up from his notes. "What is the protocol if a student is being harassed by another student?" Dr. Hammershoal thought it over. "Well, normally there would be inquiries made, but I'm assuming you aren't talking about out in the open bullying." Gerald thought about it and shook his head. "Well, generally the kindergarten operates under the rules of the jungle model. Weaklings don't graduate, and it's often up to the strong to weed them out." "And if a promising student is killed or made useless in the process?" Gerald asked, already figuring he knew the answer. Hammershoal only shrugged. "Only the strong survive. They would make a token effort at an investigation, but ultimately nothing would be done." "I see. Thank you for your honesty, sir," Gerald said, leaving the doctor to his work. Message received. They were on their own. "So what you're saying is we're on our own," Dunstan said morosely. "Sounds like it," Gerald said. He as good as said that we were free to rip each other to shreds, as long as we weren't too overt about it. "Well, crap," Dunstan said, his can running dry as he drank from the bendy straw. The five of them were sitting in the media room, talking about what they would do tonight. Rebecca was reading eclipse, Masha was lost in thought, and Dex was pretending to watch TV, but Dunstan and Gerald weren't fooled. Something was on his mind, but whatever it was, he wasn't sharing. He'd been quiet through dinner, too, he and Masha both, but if Dex was lost in thought, then Masha looked like she was working on something. She looked like one of those kids who's glued to their tablet when they're working on something they're passionate about. A house in Minecraft, or maybe some kind of puzzle. "We kind of figured it would be a lost cause, didn't we?" Gerald asked, and Dunstan nodded as he hooked the empty can into the garbage can. It hit the rim, bounced off the wall, and fell in with an angry rattle. Dunstan pumped his arm in the air before turning back to Gerald. "So, what can we do about it?" said Dunstan. "Well, we can get some evidence." "And do what?" Dex said, seeming to come out of his thoughts long enough to shoot down theirs. "They already said they wouldn't help, and I doubt she's dumb enough to write it in her journal." "Yeah, but if I could get her hairbrush or something," Dunstan said, but Dex shook his head. "It's still your word against hers, and they don't care." "Then we hit her first," Dunstan said. "We make her stop. We threaten her or beat her up. She's just a girl. We can..." Rebecca said over the top of her book, "That's pretty sexist. B, she's just a girl who can implant ideas into people's heads. What's to stop her from convincing all three of you that you're chickens or cows or something? It's going to be hard to defend your friend if you're all farm animals. Dunstan growled in his throat. Okay then, smarty pants, what would you do? Rebecca shrugged. Probably drug her. She can't do anything if she's asleep, can she? We could get our hands on some sleep medication and... Don't bother, Masha said, making the boys on either side of her jump as she came out of her very serious silence. I can handle this. They all looked at her, not quite believing. Then, why has it gone on so long? Rebecca asked. If you could stop it, then why have you been letting her attack you? Masha fixed her old young eyes on Rebecca, and the girl shuddered under that unwanted scrutiny. Because I wasn't aware that it was happening. If I had known, I would have blocked her out. Now that I know, I can stop it. Rebecca looked unsure, but couldn't much argue with the girl's look of determination. So, is there anything we can do to help? Dex asked. I don't think so, Masha said. Just keep an eye peeled tonight in case of trouble. I don't know what will happen if I fight back, but I might not be the one screaming tonight when she comes to mess with me. Masha went back to staring into the middle distance, but her friends made a point to look away. The little girl had an intensity that was not altogether healthy. Chandra was washing her face in the sink when her ex-best friends came in. She smirked at them in the mirror, figuring this had something to do with the little brain trust she had seen gathered up at dinner. Maybe the little bitch had told them that she was using her gifts to hurt her. Maybe she had asked them to tell her to stop. Chandra didn't care either way. She wasn't going to ease off until the little bitch was as crazy as a porta-potty rat. You two got something on your mind? She asked, looking up questioningly. Say it if you do, but make it quick. I want to catch tonight's episode of Riverdale, and I don't want to fight for a good spot. Brittany opened her mouth, but seemed to think better of it. Jenny beat her to it. There's a rumor that you're messing with Masha. That's why she's screaming every night. Chandra turned around and leaned against the sink. So what if I am? Chandra, that's downright evil, Brittany said, looking shocked. Not only is it hurting her, but it's hurting everyone else, too. Yeah, that's kind of the point, Chandra said, looking at the two of them furiously. If the whole dorm is tired of being kept awake, maybe they should do something about it. Like hurt Masha? Jenny asked, putting her hands on her hips. Chandra blew a strand of hair out of her eyes. Were these two really here to try to guilt her into laying off? If that's what it takes. She's such a little thing. I don't figure it would take much. Maybe that big dumb brute who protects her will do it one night when he's tired of being kept awake. Maybe the blonde guy in the red band class. Maybe it'll even be one of you two. Doesn't matter to me. I'll sleep like a baby. My hands are clean. Both of them looked alarmed, and that made her laugh. Come on, ladies. Don't tell me neither of you have used your powers for something you want. Jenny, didn't you tell me you made that boy stop picking on you by convincing him that he loved you? Britt, wasn't there that girl who you... Stop it, Brittany said. We told you those things in confidence while we were swapping secrets. I don't even know why this surprises us. You told us about a couple of people you had messed with your little ability. Why should it be any different here? Chandra only shrugged. Exactly my point. Don't act like I'm the bad guy here. We all have a little blood on our hands, don't we? When I break that little bitch, it would be a good idea to come back and say you're sorry. It'd be an even better idea to fall on your knees and beg my forgiveness. Because once she's out of the way, maybe I'll decide that you guys are the problem. We'll stop you, Jenny said. We know what you're doing. We'll fight back. Chandra's laugh bounced off the bathroom walls like a super ball. That little girl has more ability in her little finger than you two have put together. If she can't stop me, then what hope do either of you have? You can't keep me out. I'll break either of you in record time. You can bow beside the throne or set yourself against it. That's your choice." She pushed through them, parting them easily as she went on her way. Her smile wasn't as certain as it could have been, though. The little bitch had stopped her earlier today, and she didn't know how. Her thoughts had butted up against something strong, stronger than the usual passive resistance, at least. She had hit a wall, and it had stopped her flat. She had gotten a brief image of a castle, but it was gone just as fast. Chandra had pushed at her a few times that day, but the result had always been the same. She let her thoughts slip away as she took the remote from some blue band girl and took her seat before the flat screen. She couldn't maintain something like that while she was asleep. Once she was snoring, Chandra would get back in, and tonight it would not be gentle. Chandra was tired of playing with the little bitch. Tonight she would break her. Tonight she would flood her mind with the sickest things imaginable, and the little girl would melt like a summer popsicle. By tomorrow, Chandra thought, as she watched Veronica lay out her latest plan for tonight's story, Masha would be a shaking pile of goo, and Chandra would be back where she belonged, as the queen of this little freak show. As she sat in the armchair, crossing her legs and watching primly, she felt like a queen. No, not a queen, she thought. She felt like the woman from Derek's comics. Derek, Dickie to his friends, was a little nerd like the rest of these kids, and he had a special place for comic books, despite how much her father hated them. She would have never said so. Comics were nerd shit. But her brother had been reading one at the breakfast table one morning when she had caught sight of a woman sitting amidst a group of well-dressed gentlemen. When she had asked who the woman was, Dickie had gushed endlessly about her. The woman was vicious, compassionless, and utterly set on her goals. If Dex liked to think of himself as Professor Xavier, then Chandra liked to imagine herself as Emma Frost, and tonight she would crush this wannabe Jean Grey and put aside her only true rival. Dex was coming back from brushing his teeth when Dick called his name. The boy was standing alone for once, but Dex had little doubt that his lackeys were lingering nearby. "What you want, Dick?" Dex asked, making the name sound like an insult. "Look, I know we got off on the wrong foot, but I want to start over. It's pretty clear that you have the mettle for this, and I want you as a friend, not an enemy." "Uh-huh," Dex said, crossing his arms and looking at Dick skeptically. "So, why not come sit with us tomorrow for breakfast? We can all work out together, and you can hang with some like-minded people. What do you say?" Dex thought about it, weighing the other boy's sincerity and finding it lacking. Would Ryan be welcome to come sit with us? Dick laughed, like Dex had just said the funniest thing in the world. "That runt? Of course not. You gotta cut the fat a little, D. The kid's holding you back. You've got a lot of dead weight around you, in fact. Why not come hang out with us and get rid of some of that?" But Dex walked past him. He'd heard enough, but as Dick put a hand on his shoulder, it appeared he hadn't said enough yet. "Don't be stupid, Dex. You need friends in here. Friends on your level. No one survives this place alone, I hear." "Last time I checked, 3 was less than 10, Dex growled, letting Dick know with his eyes that he needed to remove that hand. Dick must have gotten the message, because he took it off and folded his arms too. "I mean real friends, not dependents. Those kids are as good as leeches. You need people to watch your back." "From who?" Dex asked. "Seems like it's just you and your cronies who are making trouble." "You don't get it, do you? We're red bands, man. I've checked it out. Red bands don't graduate, Dex. Red bands join the brute squad almost 100% of the time. There have been 4 red bands to graduate in the whole history of the kindergarten, and we would be the 52nd class." Dex didn't bother to ask how he discovered this, but it seemed that Dick might not be as stupid as he looked. This little speech got a point, or you just airing out your cheeks? My point is that we are going to be the snatchers and minders who come after them. Cutter's a snatcher. He makes no bones about that, and it's pretty obvious that they aren't just going to let us go once we're caught. None of your little friends are going to hit the road with you. Most of them won't even stick around to be minders. They'll leave you behind, Dex. You need some friends with some lasting power. Friends like me. Dex shook his head and walked off. I won't make the offer again, Dick said from behind him. Dex snorted. I'm not sure why you made it to start with, he said, moving off towards whatever fresh hell tonight brought. What do you want, dwarf? Cutter asked, leaning on his desk. Hammershoal pursed his lips. He hated Cutter, almost as much as Cutter hated him, he suspected, but he needed some information. As much as he despised him, Cutter heard things he wasn't supposed to hear, and Hammershoal had a sneaking suspicion that he was one of the few non-washouts to know what lay in paradise, the reward that awaited after graduation. If he did, he kept it to himself. People with big mouths seem to get silenced around here. Information. I have reason to believe that a student might be in trouble. Gosh, you don't say, Cutter said, putting a hand to his cheek in false amazement. It's almost like they live in a nut house. Charles Xavier's home for dangerous kiddos. Dr. Hammershoal did his best not to look amused. I just need your information, not your comedy. Cutter wiped his nails on his scrubs, looking like a carnival barker at Coney Island. You know, information around here doesn't come cheap, short stuff. What do you got to trade? Hammershoal tried to keep the disgust off his face. You're a sick man. Do you know that? Yeah. Stop doing your impression of my ex-wife. Show me what you got. Hammershoal hated it, but he had already expected something like this. He reached into his desk and took out a garment that Dunstan would have recognized very well if Hammershoal hadn't made him forget about it. It was red, white, and blue, a Ralph Lauren polo, the kind you could pick up at Goodwill for a couple of bucks. This one, however, was special. The last owner had been evaporated from the teeth up by a sniper while he shot at a diplomat in Philadelphia about 10 years ago. There was no way that Cutter could have known that, but his eyes lit up when he saw the shirt like a kid on Christmas. Ah, I can smell it. Gimme, he said, holding his hands out for the shirt. Information first, then you get your prize. Cutter blew out like a horse. Spoil sport. Okay, what is it specifically you want to know? Hammershoal blinked at him. Is there more than one student planning violence on another? Cutter laughed. Little man, there are 20 kids here. The world only had 4 people before one of them felt that was too many, so you can imagine how bad it is here. One of the blue bands, Gerald, asked me about a student who might be planning to attack another student. The boy does not seem particularly inclined to violence, so I'm wondering who he's talking to. Cutter's smile faded, and he looked thoughtful for a change. Hammershoal didn't like it. It was like watching an animal trying to figure out a lock. Just so happens that one of my boys asked me the same thing. Dexter was curious about what would happen if 2 students fought, and what the staff would do about it. What did you tell him? Hammershoal asked, and winced as the smile returned. That the laws of the jungle rule here, and as long as no one caught him, there wouldn't be any problems. Hammershoal nodded. He knew this Dexter, by reputation if not by sight, and that narrowed the field a little. Dexter had a group around him, a mixture of bands that made up nearly half the students. And if they were planning violence, that could be bad. I need more than that if you want this. I need something definitive that I can take to Security Chief Ripley. Cutter thought about it. Dick and his little group clearly don't like Dexter or his friend Ryan. There's some green band coos who hates the little girl in that class. Can't say I blame her much. That bitch is smarmy. Other than that, usual squabbles. There really isn't much. This class is sickeningly harmonious. Hammarskjöld nodded. Dex palled around with a lot of green bands, and some of the blue bands, too. It had been hard to miss the fact that Gerald and Rebecca had been with him today. It still hurt him a little to see the hatred on Rebecca's face when she saw him, but he supposed it was to be expected. He had betrayed her, and he made it a point to never be alone with her. Okay, as I thought, he said, tossing the shirt to Cutter. Cutter buried his face in it, and Hammarskjöld tried not to cringe. No matter how much they wash it, no matter how much they try to get it out, the scent of death always lingers, and it's sweet indeed. Masha was nervous as she slid under the covers, but confident that she could do this. Her castle had grown, her defenses were set. She was ready to do battle. Dex had tried to sit with her, Dunstan too, but she had told them to go get some sleep. Dex, her knight in shining armor, was looking a little ragged these days. He needed sleep, and she felt bad that he had been the one keeping up with her. She knew he needed rest, and hopefully he would get it tonight. She was going to stop this intruder, or die trying. Dunstan, well, she hated to say it, but he was more like a jester, but not in a bad way. Dunstan lifted her spirit when she needed it most. He too had been looking a little odd these days, like he knew something, but couldn't quite tell you what it was. Both of them were looking bad, and Masha wanted to help them. Tonight was the night. It was do or die, and Masha grinned as she tried to quiet her mind. Chandra had no idea what was waiting for her, and that was Masha's advantage. Chandra may have thought that she was going to toy with Jean Grey, but she was about to step into Mojo World. Let the games begin, Masha thought, with a yawn as she drifted off. Rebecca kept an eye on the little girl as she got herself ready to sleep. There was something different about her, but she couldn't put her finger on it. She seemed resolved in a way that Rebecca couldn't have said she would have been able to mimic. Rebecca would have been scared out of her mind by the idea of someone breaking into her head after lights out, but Masha seemed no more worried than she would have if someone was borrowing sugar. She'll be fine, someone said, and she was unsurprised to find Gerald looking at her from the next bed over. Creepy crawly, she growled. How do you even know what I'm thinking about? Because it's what I'm thinking about too. I imagine it's what all of us are thinking about tonight. Rebecca lay back, pulling the covers up to her chin. She was worried, but she didn't know why. She had just met this little girl. She had just met all of them, but she felt close to them in a way that she couldn't explain. She had never heard of the camaraderie sometimes discovered by individuals when they're incarcerated together, or the sudden bonds felt by soldiers when they undergo training, but it would have made a lot of sense. They were prisoners here, soldiers in the same way, and the bonds they had made were as strong as they were sudden. I wish there was something we could do for her, she said into the cuffs of her sheets. Pray for her, I guess, Gerald said, and Rebecca laughed. She couldn't help it. Prayer was the last thing she had expected from Gerald. I didn't know you were so religious. I'm not, but in this case I don't see any harm in it. This is something she has to do on her own, it seems. And I seem to recall from the short amount of time that I was in Bible school that God loves an underdog. Rebecca thought of David and Joshua and Daniel and decided that he might have a point. She sent a little prayer before going to bed and just hoped that God could hear her in a place like this. Chandra closed her eyes as she lay in her bed inside the dorm and opened them onto a medieval time. "What the hell?" she breathed, standing outside the walls of an imposing castle. As she approached, a trumpet sounded from somewhere inside, and a guy in Renaissance fair gear came up to the top and unrolled a scroll. "By decree of Lady Masha, rightful lord of this castle, all trespassers are hereby ordered to vacate post-haste or be dealt with severely." He rolled up the scroll again and disappeared, leaving Chandra to look at the faraway castle and wonder. This was very different than the landscape she usually found here. Normally it was so disjointed. Dreams about school, dreams about theme parks and play parks, or cartoonish dreams that were more than a little abstract. She could warp and corrupt these dreams, turning them from something fun into an absolute nightmare. But the landscape was rarely this cohesive. The little bitch had been expecting her somehow. Well, that was fine. Chandra didn't need her permission to mess things up. She extended her thought towards the wall, meaning to turn it into marshmallow, but the walls stayed intact, made of thick stone. Chandra furrowed her brow and sent a new thought towards them. She would turn them into glass and break them into pieces. She would smash the little bitch's wall into pieces then, and she would... The walls were still stone. Chandra gritted her teeth, but she wasn't out of tricks just yet. If this was how the little bitch wanted to play, then that's how they'd play. Chandra summoned an army of soldiers in the empty field before the castle. These were no tame fantasy knights either. Chandra had imagined some rough and rowdy mercenaries from the fantasy novels she used to read. These were real headcrackers, and she had no doubt that they would make short work of whatever the little bitch girl had mustered up. Instead of the drawbridge coming down, though, Chandra saw the walls fill with catapults and bowmen who rained down boulders and arrows on her men. No problem, Chandra thought, summoning up a bunch of horsemen and giants to get in close. The giants came in to bang on the walls, sending some of the archers falling, but when they started dumping oil on them, they stumbled away and started batting at their burning skin. Chandra was getting frustrated, so she summoned a bunch of men on bats to fly over the walls to finish them up. They were met by a bunch of Pegasus riders, and there amongst them was the little bitch girl. She was dressed like a warrior princess, stabbing the bat riders with her spear and sending them falling to the ground. She moved her Pegasus riders with expert skill, and Chandra summoned more of the bat riders to combat them. Chandra summoned dragon riders, manticores, and all sorts of terrible things, but the archers just shot them down. The catapults scattered others like bowling pins, and the warrior princess and her Pegasus riders did for the rest of them. Chandra realized that she wasn't being diverse enough, only focusing on one spot at a time, and she was growing frustrated with the girl's ability to put her aside. The dragon that rose from the forest was huge, smog incarnate from all those nerd movies her brother liked, and Chandra rode on its back like a flea on a dog. The bats and Pegasus scattered, but not the girl. Chandra made the dragon breathe fire at her, but she dodged nimbly aside and drove the spear against the underside of the dragon. The hot breath came on regardless, slagging the wall and sending the defenses tumbling onto the ground troops. Chandra didn't care. She didn't need them anymore. She had the girl right where she wanted her, and the combat between the two of them was just fine. The dragon swiped at the Pegasus, but the nimble creature easily avoided it as the little bitch looked for a hole in the dragon's armor. Good luck, Chandra thought. There were no holes in this dragon. She'd be hard-pressed to bring it down with just her little spear. When the dragon swerved in midair, Chandra thought she had her. The tail whipped around directly in the path of the flying horse, and it would have knocked the little bitch girl off if she hadn't jumped over it and landed just as easily on her horse again. The dragon sucked in breath to breathe fire, and as the gout raced out, the Pegasus banked out of the way, losing only a few burnt feathers for the maneuver. She went right back to jabbing at the dragon's underbelly, and Chandra had to admit that she was persistent. "Jab all you want, little bitch. His armor is impregnable. You'll never—" But when the dragon lurched suddenly, Chandra knew that she had overestimated the beast. It started to drop, blood oozing from the wound on its chest, and as it fell, Chandra summoned one of the bats for herself and jumped off. The girl had been waiting, it seemed, and as she came in, Chandra gave herself a sword and a shield to hold her off. The tip of the spear skipped off the shield, but as Chandra chopped at her with the heavy old sword, the girl was already gone. The two of them fought, colliding and breaking again and again, and when the girl took the bat Chandra was on through the membrane of its wing, Chandra managed to land it safely before trading her longsword for something a bit more comfortable. The rapier was similar to the ones that she had used in her fencing classes, maybe a little more ornate, and she stood glowering at the little girl on the winged horse, shouting her challenge up at her. "Coward! Come fight me on the ground like a real warrior!" To her surprise, the little bitch landed. She donned a shield, a small one that fit over her arm, and as she approached, she looked as stoic and ready as a 6-year-old in armor could. Was she taller? Chandra didn't know. She thought she was, but it was honestly hard to tell. The way she held that shield and spear made it look formidable too, and Chandra wondered if she knew how to use it. She had been cutting down her warriors with relative ease, but most of that was pretend. All of this was pretend to one degree or another. That was all these mental battles were when you came down to it. Who had the best mental acuity? Who had the most vibrant imagination? Or who could think their way around their opponent? Chandra, despite her age, had a very healthy imagination, and she had been cultivating it for as long as she could remember. This was what it was all about, mental combat to one degree or another, and she would give the little bitch girl her due, because she had made her fight for every inch today. The girl was strong, stronger still now that she was aware that someone was playing in her mind. But it didn't matter. Chandra had fought like this before against people whose imagination made this one look weak indeed, and she had always won. This contest would be no different. They squared off, the girl smirking as Chandra tossed her shield away and took her stance. "If you leave now, I promise I won't hurt you," the little bitch girl said. Chandra almost laughed, but instead she lunged forward, grinning as the girl barely got her shield in line to block the blow. She had her spear up like some kind of pint-sized Spartan warrior, and when she thrust, Chandra put it aside easily. Her retort was quick and precise, but the girl twisted away and thrust again. Chandra put it aside too, taking her time as she felt out the girl's skill. It didn't take long. The girl had clearly never used a weapon before in earnest. Her knowledge of fighting was from movies or video games, and she was clumsy with the spear, but not the shield. The shield was always in the way, blocking her shots when they came clanging in, but each block was slower. Her arms were clearly getting tired, and Chandra supposed that she should have done a few more mental jumping jacks. The kid had skill, but she was scraping the bottom of the barrel, and that was clear. When the first slice rode high on the shield and cut her arm, she cried out and tried to retreat. But there was no retreat from Chandra's blade. She slammed at her, smacking at the shield and sending it jittering this way and that. Finally, her arm fell too low, and Chandra put the tip right into her shoulder. It bounced, but only a little. The spear tried to come up, but Chandra backhanded it away contemptuously. The spear went flying, and Chandra put the point of the rapier into the girl's other shoulder and smiled as she cried out in pain. The flutter of wings and the cry of a horse was all the warning she got before the Pegasus tried to kick her in the face. It flew in front of its rider, hooves pawing at the air, but Chandra got tired of the game. She backed away a little, putting her hand behind her back as she got some distance between herself and the Pegasus. She had liked Pegasi since she was a kid. They had always been her favorite mythological creature, but this one was a bit too close for comfort. She pulled the handgun out from behind her back, the shape similar to the one her father had taught her to shoot, and put 3 rounds into the creature. One of them hit it square in the forehead and dropped it like a sack of grain. Then she stepped over it and leveled the gun at the bleeding girl. "You broke the rules," the girl said wetly, coughing up some blood as she stared into the gun's barrel with more bravery than she had any right to. "Sue me," Chandra said, debating whether she wanted to shoot the kid or stab her with the sword a bit more before she died. "I must say, I'd expected more from you. The way the teachers go on about you, I would have thought that you'd have been harder to kill. You know, however, that once I kill you, your persona here, I mean, you'll pretty much be brain dead. You knew that, right?" "I guess," the girl whispered, still staring down the barrel of the gun. "Well, aren't you a smarty? Let's see what all that smarts looks like, splattered on the ground." She almost shot the kid on accident when she smiled at her, not understanding what the bitch had to smile about. She had lost. She was going to die now. Chandra had won. What the hell did this little girl have to be happy about? "That's why I cheated too," she said, and when Chandra squeezed the trigger, she fell over dead. But the world didn't immediately go dark. The medieval times thing persisted, and she glanced around in confusion. This wasn't right. Something was amiss. What had the little bitch said before she axed her? She had cheated. Cheated or not, this all should have collapsed when she died. So what exactly had she... The thing that hit her in the back sent the rapier and the gun flying in either direction. Chandra was thrown forward, falling across the dead girl as she tried to get control of her limbs. They didn't seem to want to obey her, jittering and convulsing as she lay in the dirt and blood. She turned her head as a shadow fell across her, trying to see who it was, and her eyes went wide. It was her. It was the bitch girl, and her hands were crackling with lightning. You cheated, she stammered, her jaws clacking as she tried to speak. "Sue me," she retorted, mimicking Chandra's words perfectly. "How?" she asked, her hands grasping for the shield, but unable to grab it as her fingers clutched feebly. "I simply let you see what you wanted to see. You wanted to see me on the battlefield, so that's what I gave you. You wanted to kill me, so that's what I gave you. I let you come all the way to the end, only to stumble at the finish line. Did you have fun, Chandra? Did you enjoy killing me?" Chandra nodded, feeling some of her control come back. "Good. It'll be a high note for you to go out on." Masha opened her hands and let the lightning arc into her rival. She was a wizard, a spell slinger, and she let the magic fly. Chandra had thought the girl was at the bottom of her imagination, but Masha had just been getting started. She shocked her enemy, putting enough energy into it to electrocute 100 death row inmates. Chandra bucked and smoked, her clothes catching fire and her skin beginning to melt. Her eyes burst in their sockets, her eardrums popped, and her mind unraveled. All her anger and hatred dribbled out of her like spit from an open mouth. Masha stood over her as she died, inside her own head. and she could find no pity for the girl. After all, it was Chandra or Masha, and even at 6, Masha knew it couldn't be her. When Chandra didn't get up for breakfast, no one much noticed. When she wasn't at her first class, the teacher had a minder go down to check on her. The minder returned a half hour later, whispering something to the teacher that made her gasp. "Students, I'm afraid to report that Chandra will no longer be joining us. She was discovered this morning in a catatonic state. She's been taken to the infirmary, but it's unclear at this time whether she will ever come out of it. They will likely send her home so that she can live out whatever is left of her life with her parents. There are sometimes side effects of using mental powers. Too much strain on the brain can cause aneurysms, and worse, so be mindful of how much you use your special gifts." The class was a twitter with quiet talk, but Masha didn't join in. She had vanquished her first opponent and lost a part of her innocence along the way. She didn't feel bad. It was the way of the world, after all. Only the strong survived, and now Chandra knew who was the stronger.